بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. So today inshallah we look at um, um, kind of the arguably the most practical things, which is a list of some. It's probably gives a kind of 40% picture. I don't mean 40% of all hadiths, but a 40% picture of the main things that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned about moral decay and how things will slowly get worse and worse and worse until the end of time. So these signs are useful because we're supposed to fight against them um, directly as opposed to kind of generally. And they are good pictures of how to measure ourselves, measure the society we're in, and what we can do and how we can change. It's also a reminder. It's nice to see, these milestones being, when you see something really crazy, really disturbing, it's nice to say, okay, this is supposed to happen. It's also support there as well. So moral decay. So Al-Jariri, one of the early Muslims, he said the first generation Muslims interacted with one another on the basis of deen. So the way that they dealt with each other was deen, that I'm a slave of Allah, you're a slave of Allah. Allah is above me, He's above you. I fear Allah, I love Allah, I'm turning to Allah. There is right and wrong because there's a deen. Then religion became weak. So the second generation dealt with each other on the basis of loyalty. Right? So that comprehensive that comprehensive feeling or sense was lost, but at least they had loyalty. Then loyalty became rare. So the third generation dealt with each other on the basis of self-respect. At least respect yourself. You can't be loyal to other people, but at least have some self-respect. Then self-respect became flaky. So the fourth generation dealt with each other on the basis of avoiding embarrassment. Right? Similar kind of thing. Then Muslims stopped having any shame. It's like, well, people wouldn't do this because it would be embarrassing. But then nobody cares anymore. Then Muslims stopped having any shame, so they could only coexist on a basis of mutual interests or fear. Meaning, you can't get people to do anything anymore. The only way you can do it is through fear. Right? So they're scared of the police. You're going to confiscate something from them. They'll benefit from it. Right? This is a totally different thing. Now, it's possible. It's less likely. It's possible as well to translate this as they dealt with Allah. Right? Um, because some of this as well, you could say that as well, because it's the same thing in reality. Some of these sentences you couldn't translate as dealt with Allah, but it's possible. They dealt with Allah on the basis of religion. They dealt with Allah basis on being loyal to Allah, then being self-respect to themselves as a slave of Allah, right? And then having just shame before Allah, I'm just too ashamed for this to happen, and then just raghba and rahba, meaning, oh Allah, I don't really have a relationship with you, but I do want paradise. And oh Allah, I don't really have a relationship with you, but I do fear hellfire, right? And so this degradation, right? So he's talking about these different stages of the Muslim Ummah. And it also tells us how, that to some extent there are certain, things that have to be there. Okay, and so the Prophet ﷺ, just gives us that general picture of moral decay that he described, and he's not describing it as a prophet, he's describing it as an observer, as a social historian. And the Prophet ﷺ said, as noted by Abu Ya'la and Tabarani, he said, "How will you be, O people, when your women step out of line and your youth are immoral? O Messenger of Allah, will that really come to pass?" He said, "Yes, and worse." He says, how will you be when you no longer command the right and forbid the wrong? I skipped a line here. They said, oh Allah, oh Messenger of Allah, will that really come to pass? And then he said, yes, and worse. How will you be, uh, how will you be, sorry, how will you be when you see bad as good and good as bad? I see a number of typos here. My apologies. So when you see bad as good and good as bad. So notice this decay. So they're shocked. They're like, is that really possible that we'll stop command and right, or that people will like this will happen? Like how can youth be immoral? That doesn't make sense because there's adults around them, right? I mean, there's adults there to give them structure. Right? And here, interesting this word, either tagha nisa or tagha nisa'ukum. Tagha means I translated it to step out of line, and it sounds very kind of patriarchal or whatever it is. That's one translation of it. Tagha nisa'ukum, to literally to go beyond the bounds. When your women go beyond the bounds, it could be when your women are immoral. When your women are immoral, right? Or when your women are sinful, right? And so, that's another translation there. But can you see the issue here is to say, well, how is it possible for these people to do bad things when there is an authority over them? These women have men and these youth have parents. So how is it possible? Right? And then they say, oh, you're, oh, Messenger of Allah, will that really come to pass? Will that really happen? He says, yes, and worse. Right? So this is very, very practical. It is very practical, right? Is that this is what one of these things we see is just kind of like, oh, what can I do? She doesn't listen to me. What can I do? They don't listen to me, right? It's like, well, how and when did that happen? Right? How did you get to this stage where things are just totally out of, right? You know, let's say for example, a very practical thing, um, you're not comfortable with your wife working in a certain environment, or you're not comfortable with your wife dressing in a certain way. Like, when did in your relationship, when did it get to that stage where you couldn't have that conversation anymore? Right? Well, how did that happen? That's a real question, right? And vice versa, right? Your wife should be at a situation that I understand you have to work, but I really don't feel comfortable with you working with so and so. Like, I've seen her, I just can't deal with that, right? That's way too much, right? Or this is inappropriate or whatever it is, right? In terms of like a real thing, right? Jealousy and levels of jealousy are real, and there's a place for it, there's not a place for it. But the point is a conversation, and that conversation should be based on morality, right? That you can actually talk to people, right? And there's some kind of control over people. Like, this is haram, let's not do this, right? But notice that the authority is gone, your youth and your women, that there's an authority structure, and then suddenly, right, just like whatever, right? The whole iPhone thing, right? It's very, very difficult telling a ninth grader you can't have an iPhone. Very difficult. But when did that start? Like, when did you lose control? And why did you lose control? And how did you lose control? Right? And for many, let's say fathers speaking, for example, is that you didn't really invest, right? There was no real relationship. When they were 2, 3, 4, 5, you're not really part of the life. You're not there. It's you know, you're not really part of the life. And so when you get older, it's kind of, you're not really part of it. You're just somebody who steps in now and then and says no. So it's like, if I just push enough, you'll say no, right? And so again, this is a very difficult thing to do, and no one's perfect at raising anybody. But this it's very interesting the way the Prophet is saying it is, look, there's a structure that will fall apart. Authorities will fall apart. How on earth did that happen? How will you be when you no longer command the right and forbid the wrong? So they said, Ya Rasulullah, will that really happen? He says, yes, and worse. So how's that possible? Right? How will you be when you see bad as good and good as bad? Right? And this is something we see right now, right? You speak to the average Muslim, and that's exactly what it is. You see bad as good and good as bad, right? Let's say, right, this is the quote from Shakespeare, foul is fair and fair is foul from the witches. That which is good is bad and that which bad is good, right? So classic thing, right? Like, I remember being in Jordan, and they had these signposts from the UN or something like that around, huge signposts on things like she's too young to be a mother, right? She's too young to be a mother, meaning working against teenage weddings, right? Teenage marriages, etc. Right? And I think it's against the law now. I think in Jordan, something like that, to get, I don't know, something like against the law to get married before 16. So before 18 and before 16, they need to have permission of a judge, right? And so when reality, like the reality is that people from the age of like 12 up do all sorts of things. So that's just reality, right? See how many hadith there are about people getting people making sure that people that women, girls and boys get married young, and that if you don't get them married young, you're going to be part of their sin. But it's just like that's such a weird thing. Like that's not a real discussion to go and tell people, oh yeah, your 12-year-old, 14-year-old, 16-year-old should get married. That's like, well, why would a 16-year-old get married? That's like crazy. That doesn't make any sense, right? So it just that's just normal. That's like just a weird thing throughout the world, Muslim world, or at least most places. And so the idea that, for example, something haram should happen, it's like that's just normal. And I mean, what do you mean something haram? Well, as long as nobody knows about it, as long as nobody gets pregnant, or even small things like, oh, I mean, yeah, of course, this person is going to be a teenager, they're going to be sexually interested, and they're going to look at things, think about things, and so that's just fine. That's not even a problem. It is a problem, right? It's a problem. That shouldn't happen, right? Or polygamy, right? Who's the first person who's going to object to you if you talk about polygamy? Is the Muslims, right? When it's something that is good and noble, but people are like, oh, not interested, not interested. That's really bad. It's a shock, right? You know, there's so much social uh, um, what's the word? Abhorrence, Muslim social abhorrence to polygamy that basically makes it impossible in many societies, because it's just seen as haram, it's seen as immoral, it's seen as something that's like this is just shockingly, it's impossible, right? Whereas it's something that's noble, right? Just fair is fair, fair. So the Prophet is saying, how will it be when somebody, if somebody does this, they're looked at in a bad way? See how it is. Signs at the end of time, right? Music. You say music is haram, they're like, oh my God, you're such an extremist, right? That's extreme. Like, how can music be something beautiful? How can Mozart be haram? That's like you're really extreme. That's really demonic, actually. That you think that something is beautiful and nice is suddenly really bad, right? And there's many things like that. How can an unmarried girl wear a hijab? That's such a weird thing to do, right? She's only like 20 for crying out loud. She's only like 15. Like, that's like weird. Why would you wear a hijab? Like that's something for like older people, women. Like why would you wear a hijab? That's such a weird thing. It's like that's like so oppressive, right? 12-year-old wearing hijab, like, oh my God, what are you trying to do? Try turn her into a nun, right? That's really weird, right? There's so many things that if you spoke about it publicly, they would be shocked, right? That's strange. Or abstinence in the dunya, right? Muslims will come up to you and like object to what you're talking about. If you talk about doing without, like, they find it really weird. They wouldn't find it balanced. They'll say you're not balanced, right? So, and I've spoken about this before, like somebody who's living in an RV, right, in California. Say, well, why do you live in an RV in California? So why do you live in like a camp? What's it called, a camper van? So, oh, because I work part time and I dedicate myself to worship. But like, you're not balanced. Like, this is the world. You got to do this. Like, no, that's not true. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to do that. Yeah, but what about the kids? Like, yeah, the kids are fine. You can live in an RV. Why not? Why not? As long as it's sanitation, as long as it's warm, as long as it's this is fine. So, well, what do you do the whole day? So, well, I do a bit of work and then I just pray. I say, bro, that's not right. You're supposed to, you're supposed to do this and this. Like, that's not true, right? How would this, the Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, he mentions that about breaking the fast of a fasting person. Why do you have that reward? He says because the Salaf, the early Muslims, would not work in Ramadan. They would not have any means of income. And so you are the means that allows them to fast. They would not have any income. And so certain people would say, oh, I have money and I have grain, and I will give people food to break their fast on. And so the level of the level to which everybody is just steeped in the dunya, and that's just normal, and we couldn't do otherwise, and it would be too extreme for this person, it's too extreme for that person, so that we have to give in and give in and give in, and then just spend all our lives in the rat race, right? And then get caught up in this and get caught up in that. Just like, that's just how it is, right? There's no other way, right? We would deny any other way, and if somebody did something else, we would criticize them and say this person is not balanced, right? This person is not balanced, right? And so this is, there's countless things like this, that where the Muslims you would get criticism from the Muslims before the non-Muslims on these issues. In the Sahih Bukhari Muslim, there will come a time when people no longer care whether or not their income is halal, right? Major issue today, right? People just like, it's not even relevant, right? So riba, it's like, oh, it's okay. Riba is just right. It's just widespread. And the Prophet said, of the signs of the hour are that sacred knowledge will be taken away. Ignorance will be widespread. Illicit sex, zina, will become common. Alcohol, and so I've mentioned about this before, because zina, the Prophet said, zina is with the eyes, with the ears, with the tongue, with the hand, and finally with the private parts. And so this is just very normal. It's just like, it's not even a problem, right? You say, well, Farid, who's your favorite actress? Oh, so and so, so and so. It's like, so you have a favorite actress? You say why? Right? Yeah, she's very good looking. What's wrong with that? But that's a normal response. That's okay. Like it's okay to just do that. That's normal, right? Or I like, and so, and then my wife also has her favorite actor. Like, yeah, like super good looking guy. It's like, well, how is that okay? Right? That's also zina. Right? Socializing when people are dressed up, right? Same thing. Zina. Illicit sex will become common. Alcohol will be drank publicly, and men will disappear, so much so that for every 50 women, for every 50 women, there will be only one man to support them. And so this is again exactly what we see today. Men and women generally disappearing, right? So is this actually the case? So again, this comes back to the question: is this actually the case? Meaning physically, there will be so few men, or people will give birth to women, or there will be mass deaths of men, or does it mean that there will be men, but they're not any useful? There's no qayyim. There's nobody to support anybody. Nobody who has the maturity to go to work, get a job, pay for somebody, right? Like just be mature about it, and deal with difficulties, and just navigate to some extent some basic things, right? And right, so it's a major problem. I remember talking to the boys at school, and they're like, "Oh, you see yourself as a student?" I said, "Yeah, we see ourselves as a student. What else do we see ourselves as?" I said, "You're not students. You're here to build the school. You're teachers. Like you're here to like the idea that a teenage boy is there to build a structure, not to follow a structure. So, well, obviously, he's not going to get married at 13 because that's how he sees things. He just follows. It's like whatever happens, if everybody's running around, I'll run around. If everybody's making noise, I'll make noise. As opposed to no, like I'm here to make a structure. Go ahead, Hamza.
Personally, the way I saw that is, yes, there's men that don't support women, but there's also women who don't accept being supported, and they'll take only a certain kind of support that they would like, and not what their husbands have to give them.
Hmm.
So I think it's both ways. There is the men who don't go that extra mile, but there's also the women who don't accept um that degree of support.
Hmm. And so yeah, that's that interesting thing here, right? This word tagha, where is it here? How will you be when women step out of line, right? So I remember, there's extremes on either side, right? You see lots of scenarios in many Muslim countries where there's a kind of extreme situation where it's very weird, where women are basically physically or practically abused. Things like, for example, made to do cook and clean for people they're not even married to, or whatever it is, and all sorts of things like that. But there is a social order, right? There is a social structure. There is such thing as adab with your husband, adab with your father, right? And when that's just not even there, like, what are you even talking about? I don't even know what you're talking about. Then all of these things, you know, these things happen, right? So it's a major thing, right? So the idea that, for example, like I accept only theoretically the idea that my husband can tell me to stop talking, right? So obviously anybody would be like frustrated. Here's my husband saying stupid things, and I'm like, oh my god. And he's like, no, stop now. And you're like, no, I'm going to keep talking, and I have a right to, and I'm going to do this, and I can say this. Like, no, you have to stop. Like, this is your husband. Your husband is speaking, and he's like, okay, yeah, but he's speaking now. Like, he's told you to stop talking, and you have to stop talking. This is your husband. Like, respect your husband. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I do sujood to my husband? Like, on out of all the people in the world, my husband's the biggest idiot ever. Like, why would I do that? Oh, because he's your husband. You got to show respect to your husband. Like, why? Right? That whole idea is just lost totally. Right? And that is not something unique to Islam. It's something that is, you find it throughout many cultures, because it's actually a part of nature, right? And it creates, that thing there, done in a proper way, with rahmah and with wisdom and everything. Right? I'm not talking about being abusive, but the idea that there is this, right? Right? And this led to things like Andrew Tate, who we don't agree with, and all sorts of things. And there's people way before Andrew Tate and outside of the Muslim context, right? It's obvious what's going on, that it's off on many levels. Men aren't men, and women aren't women. Period. Right? And so yes, exactly. There's no women, that women who are not happy to, they don't want to accept an authority. They just can't understand that. They don't want it. So then it's like, well, it's not going to work then. At the end of time, there will be there will be devout worshippers who do not understand their deen. They are not fuqaha, and irreligious Quran reciters, right? Performers, qurra, right? So this is what we see, is just, right, just showbiz, right? General showbiz. People who are followed on YouTube is because they're entertaining. That's how it is. It's entertainment. Uh, People who, they do ibadah but they don't understand the things. A classic example: this person's very diligent. He's, not to pick on anybody, but say, for example, a Deobandi thing. It's like, okay, they have a beard, it's a fist length. The meat is certified by this company. And they go and pray, they're all at their trousers. Okay. And then they're driving a 5.6 liter engine car. It's like, well, what's the point of rolling up your trousers, rolling up your pants when you pray, and you drive a 5.6 liter engine? Like, why do you drive a 5.6 liter engine car? It's like, oh, because I pull down trees. Okay, that makes sense. That's what you use it for. Or I move, cattle around. But like, it's a ridiculously large car for what? Right? Because it's sort of, it's waste. So that's the whole point. The Prophet ﷺ was telling us that the believer, his trousers are his izar rather. The Prophet ﷺ said the izar of a Muslim is between his knees and his ankles. Right? He says anything that's below the ankles is in the hellfire. Okay. And so the whole idea is having excess clothes. Cloth is expensive. So do you understand why? No, I don't understand why. It's just a random thing that you do, right? Or you stand shoulder to shoulder with your brother. Why do you stand shoulder to shoulder with your brother? Oh, because equality, brotherhood. So okay, we don't even give salams to him. You hate him. You have a bad opinion of him. So that doesn't. You don't understand your deen. Right? You do things, but you don't understand your deen. Right? You go on Hajj, but you're racist. Right? Every year you spend money, but you're racist. So well, it doesn't make any sense. The whole point is uniting mankind to see that we're all equal. And then you're still racist. Right? So worshippers who do not understand their religion. Right? And irreligious Quran reciters. Right? The other day, I was in a masjid and I said, it wasn't my masjid. I said, oh, is there an imam here? And they said, no. So then I led the prayer. And then at the end of the prayer, somebody came up to me and said, oh, what so-and-so did was rude and inappropriate. He knows that I'm an imam and I lead prayers. And, this is how we divide people. And he walked off. So basically, there was an imam there. It wasn't the imam of the masjid, but he was an imam. I'm not an imam. And he got upset, right? Because nobody mentioned him. And I was like, subhanAllah. I mean, I understand that he could be, as a normal person, you could be, but as an imam, like imams don't want to be noticed, do you? Right? You're not like, oh, why didn't you notice me? Why didn't you ask me a question? Right? May Allah forgive me and Allah protect me. If somebody said, is there a faqih around? Right? And I'd be like, oh, you didn't mention me. So I don't really consider myself a faqih with all due respect to my, illustrious status among the ummah. Right? So that's a normal basic thing. Is like you don't see yourself as very important. When someone got really upset because they weren't mentioned, like that's it's kind of ajib, right? And this is or way worse than that. But just performers, right? Qurra are performers. May Allah protect us all. And the Prophet ﷺ said, the hour will not come until people start competing over how beautiful their mosques are. Right? And there's a hadith here that I skipped, I forgot, was that their mihrabs will be beautiful, but their hearts will be disgusting. Right? So, it's not a priority at all, beautiful mosque. Right? Of the signs of the approach of the end of time are that there will be plenty of rain with little crops, and that there will be plenty of Quran reciters and few that understand the details of the religion. There's very few fuqaha, right? Again, this is when people want people to. I need an imam. Okay, what is he going to do? He has to do the maktab, meaning teach kids alif ba ta, and he has to recite lead tarawih. Okay, but that's not a priority at all. Okay, does he understand the details of the deen? No, very few people understand details of deen. Right? Like I would say, people like myself who understand some details in a few, and I don't consider myself a faqih at all. Right? Like generally, I don't know the answer. I don't understand. I'm still working things out. Right? So I see other people like have no clue whatsoever. As one teacher said, laughingly, my students are muftis, meaning I'm not a mufti. How are my students muftis? Now, what are you talking about? Right? So it's a major problem, right? Totally. And it comes from us. You're like, okay, we need someone to lead tarawih. Like, that's not really important at all. And that there will be plenty of rulers, but few that can be trusted. And the Antichrist will appear at a time when religion is weak and no one is learning sacred knowledge anymore. Right? People don't apply the deen, and people don't understand the details of the deen. And the righteous will disappear one by one, and all that will be left will be barley chaff, or the membrane of a date seed. That's kind of skin that's around a date seed, right? So there's just like nothing left. And Ibn Abi Khaythama, he mentions in his Tarikh that Amr ibn Maymun is one of the Kufans, early Kufans. He went into the masjid and he saw everyone was saying, "Oh, isn't it so bad that Sayyidina Umar has passed away? Isn't it so bad, etc." And so he says, "You all wish that the world would never end, but Allah has refused to let it remain. Right? This world is going down the drain. So yes, we were sad that things are bad, but we're watching the world is going down the drain. So you're like, oh my God, the world's going down the drain. So yes, that is true. Why are you surprised? right? That's the reality. The world will only end when the righteous are gone, right? So that's this key thing. Where are the righteous, right? And it's a huge shock when you see a righteous person. I saw a number of righteous people on that disappear and nobody take their place, right? That's something that we're seeing again and again and again. The hour will not come till abstinence, zuhud, right, or indifference in the world will be mere stories. You will have stories about people like this. So and so, he didn't used to eat very much. So and so, he didn't care about money. So and so, it's a story. That's all. It's not a thing that you actually see. It's just stories. And precaution, what are in religion? Mere affectation. Right? It's not a real thing that you see. Right. So again, the same thing. You're rolling up your trousers, but like that doesn't really make it doesn't really add up. Right. It's just a thing that you do. Right. If I didn't roll my trousers up, it would look weird in front of other people. So I just whatever. Right. That's takalluf. Right. You're just being careful, and it doesn't really make any sense. Whereas, it should be meaningful. Go ahead, Hamza. You had a question.
My question is, considering all these things, like the state of the rulers or the ulama, and um the prevalence of fawahish, how does that, like, how should that inform the way we interact with the world?
Number one is command and forbidden the wrong. That we're supposed to walk against that. Right? We're supposed to, show people this and say this is wrong. Right? This is so commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. This is how that's the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when corruption becomes widespread and nobody says anything about it, then Allah destroys everybody. So that's just how it is going to be. So that there's going to be more and more immorality and less and less and less resistance to it, and then it becomes more and more and more, and that's it. Right? And that's how, like, social change, right? It's just acceptable. Like, it used to be unacceptable and then it becomes acceptable. So how did that happen? Nobody objected. So how should we interact? Is that we should be commanding right and forbidding wrong to the extent that we can in given the situation. So for example, in the in the workplace, right? In the workplace, it's like something happens and you could say something that has some validity in that context and you don't, right? For example, riba, right? That's a classic thing, right? Your boss leaves and somebody makes the riba about them, right? And you just don't say anything because they're not Muslim. And that's not right. And what you should say is, bro, do you mind talking to you privately? So you sit with them and say, bro, I don't mean to be dogmatic. I don't mean to be annoying. I'm not talking about religion here. I'm just saying, listen, we're in a company. We need to work constructively. Like, saying stuff like what you just said is not useful. It doesn't help. What you should say is, okay, let's talk about ways we can change things and let's be constructive and say, listen, the manager did X, Y, and Z, and this isn't real. Let's do it, as opposed to what a dot 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 or what a I hate that guy. It's like, it's just not useful. The negativity doesn't help, right? So you commanded them, right, forbidden them. So now this person, next time they're going to say make a riba in front of you, they're going to question, like, should I make riba or not, right? And you've changed something, right? And sometimes they don't care, right? They honestly don't care, and it's like, whatever. But at least you did something, right? And so, whatever it is, I don't like over the last year, like companies that I no longer like. I don't go to this company because of LGBTQ plus. I don't go to that company because now they support this country, and it's like, so you're doing something, right? So the point is there's some level of resistance. So that's number one. Number two, accepting that it's going down the hill, and then particularly with you and yours, right? You're like being really careful and saying, guys, like this isn't like talking to your own kids. Like the world is plummeting into an abyss, right? This is a car, right, driving off a cliff. So like, do you want to be in that car? Do you want to get off that car? So yeah, but if I fell out of the car, I'll be on the dust. And like, yeah, it's okay, right? So making sure that your kids have fully understood this, like, this is the situation. You want to be with the Dajjal, how to live ease and have fun and great, or do you want to do you want to go the high road and do what's right? Right, making sure that people. So there's lots of practical things, Hamza, um, that can be done, right? And we're going to see at the end as well some other advice. Is that useful, Hamza?
Yes, I'm asking because I've come across people in the past who give the analogy of every generation there's a one rung of a ladder that we're being that's vanishing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the last rung to leave is the salah and so on. So they're saying it often, I find, to as if to imply that we should lower our standards somehow.
No, that's not right. So it's true. It is true. There's a hadith to that effect that basically that we will be held to a lower standard. Okay, we'll be held to a lower standard. In that the Prophet, there's a hadith. Prophet said, you're in a generation that if you left a single thing of the Sunnah, it would be a sin for you. Whereas there will come a time that if they hold to a single thing, it'll be enough. A single part of the Sunnah will be enough for them. That's true. That you'll be held to a different standard. But that's from Allah's side. From our sides, no. From our side is we look at the world and say, I totally see myself as a stranger here. Totally understand what's going on. It's going to become more and more weird. Yes, I see what's going on, right? I don't. That's not true at all, right? So Zuhud, for example, where is it? Righteous will disappear. Where was that quote about? What was the quote? Did I just miss it? Mere stories. Like, I don't want it to be mere stories. I want to be a Zahid. Look at my life. How can I be a Zahid? Right? Precaution in religion is mere affectation. I don't want it to be mere affectation. I want it to be real. I don't care what situation I'm in. Right? I want it to be like real. Like, okay, I'm taking these precautions in my deen. Taking a precaution in deen is real. Why am I doing that? Right? So you're just asking a lot of questions and being real. Right? Like what does it mean then? You're gonna have to be a bit extreme. People, you have to be a bit extreme because everything else is off, right? And other signs of the hour are that people will only greet their friends. Right? They won't greet. They will be right. And this is a practical thing as well, right? Today's Monday. On Wednesday, so last Wednesday, my wife had an open house. Just randomly invite anybody in the community that she knows doesn't know. And Wednesday, I'm having an open house as well. Okay, why? Because nobody sees each other. Like, that's the thing to work against, right? Society falling apart. The increase of trade such that a woman will help her husband in it. The spread of pens. Notice this. This is very interesting, right? So you might say, well, spread of pens, i.e., what's the word? Reading and writing is very important. Right? People need to be literate. Right? So that's a good thing. It's also a sign of the end of time. Right? Which is interesting. So these two, this is an interesting sign of the end of time because are you supposed to be working against that? Like, people shouldn't be writing. The ubiquity, the widespreadness of false testimonies and the suppression of true ones, right? This is what we've seen for the last 100 years or more. Positions of trust will become assets, right? If you become the governor, you'll get lots of money, while zakat will be seen as loss, and learning will happen for other than religion, right? So it's hard to find. It's hard to find a faqih, and it's hard to find a faqih or a scholar who has real deen. The degenerate will rule. Politicians will be the lowest of people, or you could say the lowest of people will be the politicians, and a man will only be revered out of fear of his harm. Right? Just there's no such thing as reverence. It's just we're scared that person's going to harm me. When a man obeys his wife, is rude to his mother, and when he is kind to his friend, yet harsh to his father, when voices are raised in mosques. Right? So notice this here. So it doesn't mean, okay, then I'll do the opposite. obey my mother. It doesn't say obey your mother. It says is rude. Uquq al-walidain, it does not obedience to mother. It's rather not being rude to your mother, right? But you see, for example, the misbalance, right? When a man obeys his wife and is rude to his mother, right? When you have to keep that balance real, right? And you don't obey your wife, you're nice to your wife. Two different things, totally different things, right? I demand that you do this. You don't demand anything from me, right? I told my husband, you don't tell your husband, you ask your husband. Totally different, right? So that's a very, very important relationship, right? The man is kind, considerate, caring, uh, what's it called? Pastoral, right? But you don't obey. There's two different things, right? The Prophet described the man as a shepherd. Shepherd does not obey his sheep. He cares for the sheep. Two different things, right? And in being rude to your mother, right? Unfortunately, these kind of things happen. And there are other extremes, of course, where it's like mother is right all the time, even if it's the detriment and take over the rights of the wife, and that's wrong as well. So when is it? And he is kind to his friend, yet harsh to his father. And when voices are raised in mass mosques, right? There's no more respect for mosques, argumentation, religious argumentation all the time, etc. When singing women and musical instruments become widespread, and when alcohol is drank publicly, and when the last of this nation curse the first, right? Very important, right? So what is it? New Islam. Well, they didn't understand this. They didn't understand that. Disdain for the early Imams, disdain for Islamic tradition, right? So classic example of this is we've replaced standards, right, with new standards. So standard of what is halal haram, the former madhahib, last 1,000 years, that is the standard, right? The former madhahib. And then suddenly it's not the standard anymore. That's just, why on earth would you do that? That's weird, right? When my nation does 5 things, then destruction will befall them. When they begin to curse one another, drink wine, wear silk, have singing slave girls, and when men suffice themselves with men and women with women. Right? And this hadith is possible, somewhere in between weak or not, but there's other hadith the same thing. So the point I was mentioning here was suffice them, so homosexuality. Right? This is the signs of the end of time. And I don't think, many of these things, like this kind of, yeah, I mean, these things you could imagine the Prophet talking about, right? Because he was talking against this. And so it's something again in this society that exists. And he's speaking against this, right? So here when you say singing slave girls, obviously your own slave girl can sing for you. But the idea is that you have and subhanAllah, even the phrase, right? So the idea in the Jahiliyyah is that you wouldn't have your own wife stand in front of men and sing, because that's like, you have no ghayrat, you have no, jealousy of your wife. But your slave is of a lower standard in your eyes. Yes, she's yours and nobody else's, but she's of a lower standard. And so you don't really care because she doesn't wear hijab, she doesn't cover, right? So even in the Jahiliyyah, a slave wouldn't cover and a free woman would, right? Free woman would stay home, slave woman in the street, right? That's kind of the basic picture. So here the idea is that you don't have any, like, you're just gonna, she's somebody that kind of like anybody can do anything with, and you don't really care. And so she's just going to be there for entertainment, right? Unfortunately, now it's not even slave girls. It's just like girls, females. Right? You can have a female, like the idea that you have a female in front of everybody. Go, well, whose daughter is that? Whose wife is that? Whose mother is that? Oh, what's wrong with that? Like nobody even cares. Not even an issue. And if you said, well, out of jealousy for her and out of a protective jealousy for her, we're going to object. You're oppressive, right? It's labeled as oppression, right? So it's like analogous to saying, if you are not happy with if you are not happy with your mother being a prostitute, then you are being, because she could make money and she's free to do that, then you are being oppressive, right? See how we flip things, right? We see something that's totally shockingly bad and limiting that as oppression, right? You're oppressive if you do that. Right? It's not oppressive. That's called commanding the right, forbidding the wrong. May Allah protect us all. And this again, this comes back to Hamza's point: is that where does this come from? It comes from the women not being women and men not being men, right? It is difficult communicating and living with somebody of the opposite sex because they don't think in the same way as you. It's much easier, right? Let's say, for example, being very specific, it's very easy to navigate bedroom relationships with somebody of the same gender because you just think in the same way. It's like, yeah, right? They can communicate in the same way. So it's difficult. It's very easy to communicate. It's you're more likely to have arguments, okay? Because you don't understand each other. You think in a different way. When in reality, you have to have akhlaq. You have to have character, right? You have to be nice. You have to be forgiving. You have to do all these things that are very difficult in a relationship. And then all of those things fall apart. Then it's very difficult, right? And you see people, unfortunately, somebody who doesn't really have very good akhlaq, and then they go and get married eventually, and then they have a divorce. It's like, well, bro, like with all due respect, like you have an anger problem, you have an ego problem, like you just don't have very good akhlaq. Like you get into arguments quite a lot, and so it's kind of no surprise that that happened, right? Or the sister's like, you're not willing to submit. It's like, of course not, right? Okay, well, then how's it going to work then, right? And she was raised to not submit. She was taught from the age of 5, 15, 25, 35, right? And so, like, don't submit. You're in control, right? Whenever someone tries to limit your freedom, fight against them, right? When it's like in reality, it doesn't work. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions of the women in paradise, maqsuratun fil khiyam, right? That they are limited to certain places. Maqsurat means you're limited. You have to stay here and you can't go there. So Allah's mentioning of the pleasures of paradise are women who are limited to certain places. Why on earth would you even say that? What kind of oppressive men are you? Like you want to limit a woman's movement? So that is actually, yeah, limiting, controlling women is a part of that whole thing. That's actually a part of that whole psychophysical process. That's part of it. Like, oh, that's weird. It's like, no, it's not. And then you're going to find what people do and how people think, like, oh, yeah, I didn't realize that. Right. So it's a real thing. Right. And so those things fall apart. And then it's just too complex to this, to that. And then people end up doing really weird things, right, through being sexually disturbed. And then they start doing foul things and more foul things and more foul things. May Allah protect us all. When the end of time grows close, a man will rather raise his puppy than his own son, right? Welcome to America. The elderly will not be respected, nor the young shown mercy. Illegitimate children will become so many that a man will sleep with a woman in the middle of the street. People of that time will be wolves in sheep's clothing. Even the best of them at that time will be two-faced. Right? So this is, an interesting word here, right? Like the word in English is quite heavy still, but it doesn't actually mean very much. Like if somebody said, oh my God, they go to work, I realized that actually my mum gave birth to me before my parents were married. It's not a big deal. Like, is it going to affect your job? No one's going to say anything. It's not a problem. It's not an issue. No one cares. The hour will not come until a man will pass by a grave and rub himself over it, saying, if only I were in the place of this person here in the grave, right? I.e., people wishing to die. He'll wish he was dead. And life is so hard, he just wish he could just die. And that is legitimate when it's for your deen, right? I'm scared for my deen, right? The temptations that I'm scared for my deen, I wish I could die. That's okay, but not you say, well, Allah, make dua to Allah, but not in the dunya. I wish I was dead. I hate life. It's so annoying. That's not good. But for my deen, like I hope I die soon because I have iman. I hope I die soon because I have iman. This nation will remain on a right path until three things appear: the loss of sacred knowledge, many illegitimate children, and liars slash breakers, saqarun, right? Saqur is a shovel, the shovelers that break that break things by digging, right? You can say diggers. They said, "O Messenger of Allah, who are the liars, the breakers? A generation of people near the end of time who will greet, not great, each other by cursing each other," right? And so, unfortunately, we see that, right? People, the youth, it's a thing that they do, right? You greet each other with cuss words, and it's nice, I think, right? It's a support to see that, oh, subhanallah, Prophet said it, and here it is, right? There are two groups of people of my nation that I have not seen. In the process I mentioned, the first one, he says, the other are women who are clothed yet naked, right? This is very practical. Attracting and attracted. Their heads are like the heads of swaying Bactrian camels. They will not even catch the scent of paradise, even if its scent can be smelt from miles and miles away, right? So, very simple thing, right? Are we doing this? Are our wives, daughters, etc. doing this? Is like just this is very, very common, right? Very, very common that women are not dressed properly. It's like, well, you're wearing clothes, but everything can be seen. So what's the point, right? So being very careful about this, and being that, one person who's like, yeah, you know, So my personal take on it is like, basically, if you're not wearing a khimar, you're not doing this, because the khimar, when it covers from the head down, it covers the body, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the khimar in the Quran. Um, you know, and that's the basic picture. But then it's like, oh, but that's really weird. But that's really weird. But that's really weird. It's like, well, okay. But it should be that let's say as a man, your wife, your daughter, your sister is leaving the house, and you're like, okay, you can't leave the house like that. Like, I don't accept that you're gonna go out on the street like that, right? And that should those conversations should happen now and then, right? Now, obviously, with with girls, it's very difficult, right? I have a 5-year-old. It's already difficult. How she dress, how not dress is very hard. But the point is, you're going to navigate that difficulty as opposed to just give up. Oh, it's difficult, just give up, right? At least you fought, right? You see, for example, this sheikh and his daughter doesn't wear hijab. It happens, right? It happens. Okay, religious family, one of them's not wearing hijab. And like, you go and talk to them and say, yeah, bro, this was like a 10-year argument. So, okay, at least you fought that argument, right? As opposed to like, oh, it's difficult, don't bother. It's difficult, don't bother, right? Right. So that you command the right and forbid the wrong. You're like, no, it's not right. And then, um, you know, or you no longer care, right? And so, we should be careful about these things. We should be able to have these conversations, right? It should be a thing that we can actually talk about, right? Everyone should have heard this hadith. It's not a hadith that's in Abu Ya'la, it's in Sahih Muslim. Right? Every woman, for example, the way you dress, I should be like, this is the hadith. Put it on your mirror, right? They will not even catch the scent of paradise. What will you do when all those who are left are worthless? Their promises and trusts are never kept, and they are all against one another. And so then the Sahaba, I can't remember this name, he said, what do you command me to do? He said, stay at home with your family. Notice that. Don't talk. Do what you know to be right and leave what you know to be wrong. Attend to your own matters and leave the matters of the public. Right? So you are spending 4 hours finding out what's happening in Gaza, and you don't know your own fard ayn, and you haven't done your qadars yet. Right? One of the best things you can do for Gaza is to say astaghfirullah, start doing qada. And say, oh Allah, everything say, Allah, give the ajr of my tawbah and the barakah of my to those people defending Gaza. Right? Unless you're gonna go and fight, unless you're gonna go and do something, right? You're gonna Like, unless you have something to do, what's the point in following these things on the news and doing that? It's like, just make tawbah and get on with what you're supposed to be doing. Shaitan comes to you and distracts you from number one to number two, and then from number two, number three, and soon you're on a list 522 and you forgot number one totally, right? And same basic hadith. The Prophet said to Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, he says, "What will you do, O Abu Dhar, when all those who are left are worthless?" Same word, huthala. And he says, "What do you command me to do?" He says, "Be patient, be patient, be patient." Notice this. Super important piece of advice, right? And then here I put it in italics. I don't really know how to translate it. It says, "خالق الناس بأخلاقهم." Right? It's like, deal with people as they are, right? It's like literally deal with people according to their character. So like, I couldn't find a commentary on it. It's not well-known hadith, and it couldn't, so that's approximate meaning. However, but do the opposite of what they do, right? So you get in the office, oh yeah, hi Tim, da 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 da, do what you can do, but you do the opposite, right? You just do the opposite. Your sister, all the sisters around you are dressed inappropriately. Be nice, advise them, you do your thing, right? Everyone is mixing, pre-mixing, and you're like, yeah, I don't do that. You have to be a weirdo. Right? And there will come a time when he who patiently upholds the religion will be like one holding hot coals, right? So some practical points. Edit your environment, number one, right? Unbelievably important. Edit what you see, edit what you hear, edit what you're looking to, number one. Number two, learn. Learn sacred knowledge, learn Arabic, learn fiqh, learn hadith, understand what's going on. Get to the point where you can understand what your teachers are saying, and your teachers change from being a preacher into somebody who's giving you key information to help you solve the big problems, right? Focus on your priorities. What are your priorities? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like, oh my God, like I forgot this, right? Focus on family. Obviously, that's part of priorities, right? Make up missed prayers. Dress properly. Get rid of music, right? Put image block on. Otherwise, you're committing zina left, right, and center, right? So by default, image block should be on the whole time, and this applies to men and women. There's no difference. Right? Most of what is haram for men to look at is also haram for women to look at. Right? And so, inshallah ta'ala, there are practical things to do. And I missed major thing, command the right and forbid the wrong. And that's part of editing your environment and learning and focusing on priorities, right? And focusing on the family, commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. Look at yourself and look at your family. What's off? Right? I can look at myself right now, my family, what's off? This is not right. Right? And then you worry about the whole world. It's like, no, just focus on yourself, focus on your family. If every man would mend a man, then every man would be mended. Right? I'll stop there. Any immediate questions? Or actually, last questions. This is the last class, inshallah. Bushra, Hamza, Salahuddin. Okay, inshallah, I'll stop there. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحان الله وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وأستغفرك وأتوب إليك